Welcome, everyone. This is an exclusive preview of the fastest growing brands of 2025. This is a ranking that we put out every single year. It's one of my favorite moments that we do every single year. It's really emblematic, I think, of the year that was. We are going to, if you go to the next slide, Bobby, we have a good crew here today. I have Bobby here on the call, who's cold in Austin, but he is the one who authored this year's report in rankings, and he's going to dive deep into the data and we'll have a conversation. I also have Cooper Hardy, who works with a lot of our partners and clients on this type of data, and he's going to talk a bit more about how to get access to this type of data. We'll round out today's conversation with a Q&A. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions. This list always tends to drum up many, many questions. But before we get to this year's fastest growing brands, I want to talk a little bit about how this report came to be. So, Morning Consult, if you are new to us or not fully familiar, we are an always-on consumer signal. We survey 30,000 people around the world every single day. It's this constant pulse on what are people thinking across a wide range of topics. We collect a vast amount of data on demographics, psychographics, some of that you'll see at play today, how people behave, how they act, things like that. Of course, the focus of today's conversation is our data that we collect on over 5,000 brands. We collect full funnel data, everything from awareness down to purchasing consideration, all the way through NPS. And so we have a really good sense of how brands grow more holistically. On the next slide, what this year's rankings are a look at our purchasing consideration metric. Of those 5,000 brands, we ask how willing are people to purchase from those brands? And this year's rankings are a reflection of that. So today we're going to be spending most of our time on the top 20 fastest growing brands, but in our report, which will actually debut tomorrow, this is a special preview, you'll be able to dive into a wide range of demographics, everything from income levels to generations to parents to even TikTok users, which actually Bobby will preview a little bit today. A bit on our methodology. This is the way brands are ranked is a change in purchasing consideration from Q1 of the beginning of the year to Q3. And so it's just the difference in purchasing consideration between those two timeframes. If you are interested at all getting access to any of this information or any of this data, my colleagues are going to drop a link here into the chat. Feel free to request it there. We'll be happy to walk you through it, walk you through the data, and show you how you can get full access beyond this report. All right, without further ado, let's bring in Bobby Blanchard. Bobby, very excited for this year's report. I think, as always, the list is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, happy to be here. This year's report had a lot of really interesting data in it and some really surprising and interesting rankings as well. Before we dive in, I actually want to turn it over to the chat and see if anyone can guess what this year's fastest growing brand is. To give you some context, in 2024, the fastest growing brand was the WNBA. In 2023, the fastest growing brand was ChatGPT. Do I have any guesses for what might make the fastest growing brands list this year? I see a guess for Seven Brew. No, that's not it. Good guess though. Ozempic, that's a great guess, but no, that's not the fastest growing brand this year. Reddit, no, Reddit is not the fastest growing brand. Labubu. Jeff, do you know what Labubu is? Are you online?
Oh, I am so aware of Labubus, but do I understand Labubus? No.
I'll give you a full Labubu readout later and I'll check in this week.
Okay.
No, I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it. I'll give y'all a hint. Jeff dropped a little Easter egg in our awkward small talk at the start of this call, if anyone was here for that. F1, nope, not this year. All right, I'm not seeing it, so I'm gonna start walking y'all through the fastest growing brands of 2025. We're gonna do this one at a time, so a little dramatic. Number 10 is Chromebook. So how to read this slide, we have the 10 fastest growing brands. We're gonna be kind of going in one at a time. The number next to the brand is the amount the brand grew in total purchasing consideration from Q1 to Q3 of this year. So number 10 is Chromebook. Number 9 is ChatGPT, was the fastest growing brand in a previous year's report and is still on the rankings this year. Tied for number 7, we have Siggy's Yogurt and Fanatics. Number 6, we have Gemini. We're going to be talking a lot about AI chatbots today. They are still growing. Number 5, we have Brio's Ice Cream. Number 4, we have Great Value French fried potatoes. Number three, we have TikTok Shop. I saw somebody put TikTok. Rachel, I think you put TikTok in the chat. That is not the fastest growing brand. TikTok did not make the list this year, but TikTok Shop did. So we talk more about that brand in a moment. Fruit of the Loom is number two. And then number one is DoorDash. We had one person in the chat, Dave, correctly guessed DoorDash. That is the fastest growing brand of 2025. Jeff, I hope you are sending me some hot soup over DoorDash soon to contend with this Arctic freeze we got going on in Austin, Texas.
Yeah. You know I will. You know I will. Well, Bobby, what a fascinating list here, and thank you all for participating in our little fun game there. Like I said, every year these rankings I think really help provide a look back on the year that was, and I think I want to pull out some themes here with you that we've seen. I will flag in our official report that comes out tomorrow. The list is actually the top 20, so you can go even deeper there. But there's more than enough to talk about here. Let's start with the topic that, is on everyone's lips at all times, AI. ChatGPT was our number one growing brand in 2023, but that brand continues to make the list, and we even have Gemini emerge here as well. Can you talk us through kind of this continued AI boom?
Yeah, I was kind of surprised when I started putting this report together. I was kind of wondering if I was going to see, consideration towards AI chatbots start to plateau, but we are not seeing that at all. Really, the adoption of AI chatbots just cannot be denied. Purchasing consideration for these tools has grown year after year, even though they aren't really new or emerging anymore. For many Americans, AI tools are part of everyday life, work, and conversation. So on this slide here, in this chart, we have grouped together ChatGPT, Gemini, and Microsoft Copilot into a single brand group and trended total purchasing consideration over time. Total considering is rising across all demographics, but higher income consumers lead the pack, both in their total considering to begin with and in the growth that they've seen this year. Um, Now, while this chart groups together some of the most popular AI chatbots, we're going to look on this next slide here at which chatbots are leading the packs amongst these high income consumers. So when we compare the key brand metrics like awareness, trust, total considering, and reputation score amongst some of these seven really popular AI chatbots, there's a clear front runner, ChatGPT. It's really elevated by a much higher awareness than its competitors. Sometimes being false does matter. It also has a much higher total considering share, nearly 10 points in its closest competitor, Microsoft Copilot. But the picture's a little less clear when we look at these brands' reputation score. The top three are much closer together. Now, the Morning Consult reputation score combines measures of trustworthiness, ethics, and social responsibility, relevance, and stakeholder value into one single actionable benchmark that's updated daily within the Morning Consult intelligence platform, and that brands can use to kind of benchmark where they're at in their industry and how they compare with their competitors. Now, the higher awareness score for ChatGPT means there's a larger share of people who think good or bad of the brand, and those bad negative opinions can drag the reputation score down some, which is why even though it has higher awareness, similar levels of trust and higher considering, it actually is kind of right in the same area when it comes to reputation score with Microsoft Copilot and Gemini. Now, we can do a lot of really cool things in the intelligence platform to look at how different audiences feel towards a brand. And so one of the things I wanted to do for this year's report is to explore these brands' growth by industry, by consumers who work in different industry. Growth for AI chatbots like ChatGPT, Gemini, and Microsoft Copilot, as they are grouped together here, that has been especially explosive for consumers who work in more white-collar roles. Think financial services, technology, professional and business services, jobs like that. But blue-collar workers are also seeing a growing interest in AI chatbots. However, adoption there is not quite as aggressively fast than the white-collar roles. This is happening against a backdrop of more consumers adopting AI into their lives, even if blue collar companies may not be pushing the use of AI as aggressively as white collar companies are. And again, we wanted to pull this show off. Like we can build demographics and custom audiences across a bunch of different demographics that we track. This is just one example of the ones that we can do.
Yeah, I think what's so fascinating there, Bobby, is obviously the continued growth. We all know that. That's not news to anyone. But again, this is a list that measures purchasing consideration, whether or not people are willing to buy from these brands. And I think we've seen these AI platforms go from being a nice to have to a need to have to the point of people willing to purchase for them. And especially as they start to launch the ability for brands to sell their own products through these platforms next year, I think that's a really interesting narrative to keep watching.
Definitely.
All right. Everything always comes back to economics. Let's talk about economics. There's an economic story emerging here. Please talk to me about great value French fried potatoes and even Fruit of the Loom, these more value brands that have been around for a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, we often see a great value brand emerge on the fastest growing brands list. I think a couple of years ago, it was Great Value Cream Cheese was near the top of the rankings, if not near the tippity top there. Um, I think we have continued to see a kind of K-shaped economy develop with one cohort of consumers, higher incomes, recovering faster or having seen their demand grow faster, or consumers that, come from a lower income demographic are seeing their, economic conditions fall or not recover. Great value French fried potatoes and Fruit of the Loom, I think, speak to that. Fruit of the Loom is a particularly interesting example to me because everybody needs undergarments. It's the thing that we need to go about living day-to-day life. Um, but if you're looking to save money, that's probably one area to cut. You don't necessarily need Victoria's Secret or really nice, silk boxels. You can instead get Fruit of the Loom, something that is maybe a slightly cheaper, but still a great value to you to help save money. So I think both of those brands being on this list is reflective of that. It's that kind of K-shaped economy reality we'll see.
Of course, of course. Okay, let's maybe move on to something a little bit buzzier. TikTok Shop. TikTok has made our rankings in the years past, but now their big e-commerce platform, TikTok Shop, is the third fastest growing brand of the year. Not only is this a brand that continues to grow, but is such an important channel for marketers. Can you talk to me a little bit about what we're seeing with both TikTok Shop, but also TikTok more broadly as a platform?
Yeah, absolutely. This was also an interesting one to me, just anecdotally and speaking to my colleagues on staff. I think a lot of us have been seeing TikTok Shop come up in our day-to-day life more and more often and be a more common and frequent brand. Um, TikTok Shop's emergence on this year's list is reflective of the reality that more consumers are shopping online via social media platforms at a higher frequency. So this chart here on this slide looks at the share of consumers who shop via social media app on a weekly basis, and that's grown from 11% at the start of 2023 to nearly 20% this year. This is one of again, the cool things about modern console intelligence is yes, we're tracking brands. Yes, we can tell you how Gen Z feels about certain brands. We can also track and tell you about how consumer behaviors are shifting and how those behaviors correspond or correlate to the brand growth that we're seeing. So in this case, on this slide, we built an audience of consumers who are shopping via social media apps at least once a week. And what we can tell you about them, they are younger, they're watching live streams, they're going to social to look for products to buy. And almost 9 in 10 are also buying from companies' websites, which to me speaks to the fact that social e-commerce is not going to replace traditional e-commerce, but it's going to be a really important supplemental tool to go along with it. Now, my favorite part of this year's report, sorry, I'm biased. I do have a favorite part. I don't love all my children equally. My favorite slide is actually this next slide that looks at the brands that grew the most amongst TikTok users. Fastest growing brands report that we're going to be publishing tomorrow has a lot of different demographics in it. Yes, all respondents, but also men, women, Gen Z, millennials, high income, low income, mid income, kind of across the board. One of the new rankings we added this year is TikTok users. So, what are the brands that grew the most amongst people who are using TikTok? And what was really cool about that ranking, which we will see in tomorrow's report, is that many of these brands are legacy brands that had big major viral moments on TikTok this year or on social in general this year. A great example of that is Sprite. They released a limited time product called Sprite Plus Tea that was inspired in part by social media users literally steeping their tea bags in Sprite for the flavor. And that in turn inspired a flavor combo that they released. Magnum Ice Cream, also a cool example. They did a viral Charlie XCX Cannes Film Festival partnership and really tried to lean into youth culture, and that really clearly paid off for the brand.
Bobby, I know as part of the really important research for this report, you tried Sprite and tea. What's your
Did I had Sprite tea, I think on this past Friday last week, and you know what? Pretty good. I gotta say, I quite enjoyed it. It's probably not gonna replace my morning Red Bull, but it was pretty good for me.
Well, we can keep trying. You can keep trying that front. All right, let's talk about the king of this year's list, DoorDash. They are number one. They're not necessarily a new brand, but they are a newer brand. Why are they growing? Where are we seeing their growth come from?
Yeah, so DoorDash is by no means brand new to the scene. They've been around for a hot minute, but they have been consistently growing year over year. So this chart here looks at DoorDash's growth going back to 2021, Q1 of 2021, and sorry, Q1 of 2020, I mean, and how the growth has changed over time amongst different demographics. What sticks out to me in this year's growth is that they really grew amongst older generations, so Gen X and Boomers. And it's really worth drilling deeper into the jump in consideration for boomers. That is one demographic that, according to Morning Consult surveys, tends to prefer timeless classics as opposed to adopting new technologies and new brands. So, who are the boomers driving interest in DoorDash? Well, that's one of the things that we can do with Morning Consult Intelligence is build a custom audience of boomers who have purchase consideration towards DoorDash. These tend to be younger boomers on the scale of the boomer age, more likely to be divorced or widowed, so they may have, they're less likely to have someone to share cooking responsibilities with, and they have more disposable funds, so they're more likely to have investments and more likely to have money to spend on delivery fees. And that's it for me, I think. Just to tease a couple of the other things in the report coming out tomorrow. We have a bunch of different rankings, everything from all respondents to different generational cuts to gender cuts to income cuts to parents and TikTok users, and more case studies like the ones you saw presented today on some of the fastest growing brands of 2025. Jeff, I will pass it back to you.
Great. We are offering to folks, if you are interested, like we said, we track 5,000 brands. If you would like be interested to see if we are tracking your brand and get a readout from our team on some of the data behind your brand, you can request a free brand diagnostic. My colleagues are dropping that into the chat. Just go there, fill it out quickly, and our team will be in touch. But I want to actually bring in Cooper. Cooper is going to walk through where this data comes from and go a little bit deeper, and then we are going to dive into questions. So if you have questions, keep submitting them in the Q&A. We're getting some really good fun ones.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Bobby. And it's great to meet everybody. My name is Cooper Hardy, and I sit on our syndicated data side of the house here at Morning Consult. And ultimately, my job here at the organization is to help individuals and organizations access the 30,000 interviews that we're completing every single day. So what I've pulled up here is just a quick view into our intelligence platform at Morning Consult. And this, as Jeff and Bobby has mentioned, is our always on consumer signal. This is where we're doing continuous collection, asking individuals questions about economics, about politics, about brands, and about behaviors to ultimately provide a forward-looking lens for organizations to better understand what's happening in the world and what it means for their brand, for their organization, and ultimately how they can make the best decisions possible using the data at their fingertips. So just a quick overview here. What we're looking at again is where this data came from, right? This is our fastest growing brands dashboard where we're looking at these top performers. What we can do within this platform, though, is actually break out exactly as Bobby and Jeff shared, where we are seeing movement and how that movement is happening. So for example, we're looking at changes in DoorDash consideration based on the audience, but we're also looking at some different behavioral elements as we thought about TikTok Shop and the increased engagement with that. We can look at how people are actually making purchases through social media and how that is changing over time. The number one thing we hear from organizations and from partners is, how do we better understand how our brand is performing? How do we better understand who our consumers are? how do we communicate with them? And ultimately, how do we complete this sort of full 360-degree view of these individuals to understand not only how to communicate, but also, do they have money in their pocket, right? And how is that changed based on recent macroeconomic and geopolitical events and changes? So what we'll do here is we'll actually just game out how we would go through that experience within our intelligence platform. And again, just to give you a frame of reference, we're doing this daily collection across about 5,000 different brands in 45 of the largest economies around the world. So chances are, if you have a question about your brand, we'll have some data that can help you answer it. As Jeff and Bobby mentioned, we're doing tons of brand diagnostics for partners and potential partners. So please reach out if that's of interest. But we have tremendous industry coverage, and we can go really as broad and as wide as you all would like, or as narrow and as deep as you would like within specific segments as well. So just to use the DoorDash example in terms of how do we understand who these people are first and foremost? Well, I actually just asked our AI chat to give me a profile of DoorDash users. So within this is querying our 100 million historical interviews that we've conducted across all these different brands and organizations. But with a simple prompt of show me a customer profile of DoorDash users, we can actually see all of this breakout in a quick snapshot view, right, with key talking points. I think one of the biggest pieces of feedback we hear is it's really helpful to have access to data looking at our consumers by age, right, by ethnicity and by marital status. But what's most important for me is when I have a question from leadership, when I have a question from my boss in a meeting or in the hallway and they're passing by and they want a quick analysis of what we're seeing, being able to ask a tool like Morning Consult and have that quick readout right at my fingertips is incredibly impactful. So first and foremost, this is who DoorDash consumers are. This is what they look like in relation to the general population. The next question, however, is like, how do we actually communicate with this group? Where do we find them? How are they spending their time? How are they getting their news? Where are they getting their information? Within our daily tracking, we're asking questions about behaviors and psychographics and motivators, and also things like what social media apps are individuals using? What types of accounts are they following? As we work to craft a message to communicate with specific segments and specific groups, again, we're able to segment by all of these properties and all of these profiles to paint a clear picture for our partners. And just to give you a sense, it's a huge, huge sample size. Right here, we're looking at over 72,000 weekly plus. So this is individuals who are using DoorDash at least once a week or more frequently. Once we've painted this picture of who these individuals are and what they look like and how we might be able to communicate with them, the final and perhaps most important question is, do they have money in their pocket? How do people feel about their current economic situation? We're asking those questions every day as well. We have CEOs of leading Fortune 500 organizations signing into this platform to say every single day how our behaviors and how our outlook's changing among key segments. Here, we're looking at a breakout based upon income level, right, for different consumers when it comes to their consumer sentiment. Bobby mentioned the shift towards great value potatoes and perhaps that K-shaped economy. Well, we can actually see some of those changes as they emerge in real time, where it is certainly the current outlook is buoyed by this higher income segment, but also we see some of these lower and middle income segments beginning to dip as well. And perhaps as organizations think about the different types of consumers they're connecting with, potential, I would say, early warning signals of what might be to come. So again, this is just an example of some of the data we're collecting on a daily basis within our platform. This is what organizations are leaning on when it comes to that always-on consumer signal to have clarity as to what's happening in the world right now, what's happening in relation to their brand, and really ultimately what's happening in relation to the consumers and the segments of most importance to them. So if anybody is interested in a diagnostic of their brand, of specific segments, please let us know. I know we've dropped that in the chat. But again, this is just a snapshot to give you a sense of where all of this data is coming from and how we're powering these really impactful reports that Bobby and Jeff are sharing. So thank you, everybody, for your time, and I'll pass it back to Jeff here.
Thank you, Cooper. Yeah, again, happy to do a brand diagnostic for any folks. I know we've had a couple already requested. Please drop your name in there if you're interested in getting access to some of that information Cooper just shared on his screen. All right, let's do Q&A. We've had a lot of fun questions come in. Bobby, I'm going to start with one that goes back to TikTok.
Cool.
How should brands rethink their e-commerce and influencer strategies as entertainment, content, and commerce increasingly merge on platforms like TikTok? It's obviously such a big platform. It's one that brands need to know more and more about and are obviously engaging in a big way. But now TikTok Shop is emerging as the third fastest growing brand. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think kind of like we saw when we segmented weekly social media app shoppers. People are shopping via social media websites, yes, but they're still also shopping via brands' e-commerce traditional websites. So I think it's kind of key that you have both, that you have a presence sale, and if you're not, you're risking leaving money on the table. I know anecdotally, Instagram ads get me on a weekly basis. Something I have to try to watch out my budget for. I'm always buying something on Instagram because I saw a good ad on social there. So I think that is a space that brands have to be active on, not just to sell their own stuff, but also to be listening to how their consumers are engaging, right? Sprite is a great example of a brand that saw their consumers engaging with their brand in kind of a unique way. I don't know who came up with the idea to steep tea bags in Sprite, but whoever did, clearly a genius because it inspired a major brand like Sprite to release that new limited time product. So there's kind of both a push and pull there, right? You need to be present there to understand what your consumers are pushing you to do, but you also need to be present there to like it's one more place for you to be selling and talking about your brand and product.
Great. All right, I have a question here that is about some of the dairy brands that we have on our list. And I'll somewhat paraphrase here the question as it's asked. I'm elated to see a yogurt and ice cream on the top 10 list. Amazing. Would love to learn more about why dairy is resonating. Bobby, I actually have a theory on this.
Please
I think
do.
it has to do with the protein boom. We've seen, so just as a reminder, Siggi's yogurt is on our list, as is Myers ice cream. Siggi's and yogurts like that have really leaned into this protein first message. I think we actually have some really good research out on this from earlier this year about the growing obsession with protein and actually starting to view that as one of the core metrics of health when people are looking for what food to buy. There you go. My team just dropped in a link to that article right there, so you can see some of that data. And so I think we maybe have some of these other brands on the list as well that you'll see tomorrow. But I think this like rush into protein is why you get a Siggy's like that on the list. And I think to your point on Myers being just like a great brand that leveraged TikTok and influencers well this year is another good example of that.
And just to call out Siggy's Yogurt, when you download the full report tomorrow, you will see them, yes, on the all respondents list, but also on the men's ranking, on the millennials ranking, and on the income 50 to $999,000 ranking as well.
99,000.
99,000, yes, sorry.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think they're pretty well spread out across the board. All right. Next question I have for you is all about AI. What do you think their prominence on these rankings tell us about how consumer trust and comfort with AI are evolving, and what signals brand leaders should be watching for next?
Yeah, so I think as increased awareness for these tools goes up, we also are seeing correlation and increase in purchase consideration. So consumers are getting more and more comfortable with AI tools and more aware of them. We all seeing that kind of divergence in different consumer groups getting more passionate about the tools, higher income consumers, consumers that work in traditional white collar type roles, of course. But across the board, awareness and purchase consideration is increasing. That said, one thing for brands to be aware of is, and we've done a lot of custom research of this in Morning Consult Pro, our syndicated data research library. One thing to be aware of is that as adoption of AI becomes more and more widespread, that does threaten consumer trust. So we did a custom survey asking whether, what widespread adoption of AI would mean for consumer trust. And for a lot of consumers, it means they're going to trust brands less. And my colleague is just dropping a link to that report in the chat. Highly encourage downloading it and reading more there. But I think it's one thing for brands to be aware of as they communicate about how they are using AI and how those tools are bettering consumers' experiences and being really clear about that.
I want to stay on the topic of AI, Bobby. We have another AI in question here. And are you seeing any correlation between legacy brands, consumers in AI, and live music?
In live music, legacy brands and consumers and AI and live music. I don't necessarily think I have any data to speak to that, unfortunately, Jeff, unless you're aware of anything.
Nothing that I can speak to. I think we have seen these kind of real world experiences become really, really important when it comes to how brands exist, especially in an AI world.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that's exactly what the question was speaking to, but I'm happy to go a little bit deeper if you want to tell us if
Yeah.
we're barking up the wrong tree here. But I think there's a bit of like how they leverage that has become even more and more critical. But anyways,
One of the things that we have surveyed on is like, what do consumers want out of AI? And typically near the bottom of the list is AI being used in art creation, or AI being used in making music or making books or on, Hollywood things. Consumers are less interested in AI being used there, as opposed to AI being used in places like healthcare, in customer service, and more of aspects like that.
right. Okay. Bobby, let's maybe grab a question. Let's go back to AI. We have more AI. What opportunities or risks do you see for brands in positioning AI-related products or services across different industry segments?
Yeah, this is something else we've done a lot of research on what Americans think about AI and what they want use for it for, and how they want to see brands use it. And what typically tops this list is like, customer service, AI being used in education or the workplace, AI being used in search engines. That's a really popular use case of AI right now. And AI in healthcare as well. I think my colleague's going to drop a link, hopefully, to that chart pack. This is data from 2023, but I think it's still really interesting insights there.
Right. Well, I think those are all the questions we have. If there aren't any other questions, I think we can wrap up today. Again, this was an exclusive preview. Our actual full report is going to come out tomorrow morning. You all, because you attended this webinar, will be getting a direct email to download it. So stay tuned for that tomorrow morning, and you can go deep into all the lists. If you have any questions, if you want to get a view on your brand, on your data, make sure you're ready for 2026, feel free to reach out to us or to fill out that brand diagnostic request form. We are happy to talk with any and all of you, especially as you ramp up for the next year. Big thank you to Bobby, a big thank you to Cooper, and we'll see you all next year.
See you all next year.